Welcome to Saturday Streaming, number 7 for this series. Peace is union business. We'll be thinking of Tom McDonald tonight and singing some songs we hope you would have liked and songs that would be resonant with things that we've learnt from Tom over the years. Tom passed away just recently, so we're thinking of Tom and saying g'day to you all. Hi Valda.
Hey.
There you go, there's a face we can think of. It really does help. Yay. It does. It's like playing to people when you're not playing to people. For those who are tuning in sometime in the future or watching from further afield, we get all kinds of people all over the world. It's great, isn't it? You can just do a gig from your own studio and people can tune in anywhere. So our studio is in Millthorpe, or Spring Grove as us old-fashioned people like to call it. So to give you some idea, Sydney is behind you, 250 kilometres away. We're up in the tablelands here. It is a bit autumnal now.
Yes,
finally getting rid of autumn.
Yeah.
And
tomato rescues are going on. Yep.
Most importantly, we always remember before we start that this is Wiradjuri country. Always was, always will be. And we feel very, very... Hello, Jim, too. Jim's out there.
Jim.
We feel so lucky to call this part of the world home. It's as close to home as I've ever found in all my wanderings. I would never live anywhere else. But I'm also very aware that it's on country that remains Aboriginal land, Wiradjuri land. Peace is union business. Tom McDonald was the first person I heard use that phrase. And so that's hence we're going to be thinking of that tonight. I didn't grow up with unionism around, and I don't think you did either.
No, not really.
I grew up with a sort of an instinct towards it, which wasn't always coherent with other members of the family, but with some it was. Somewhere in my mid-teens, I was living in a mining town. That helped. A mining and cement town of Portland. So all of a sudden I started to hear about what unionism meant and what it was all about. But I didn't have any great academic interest. It was just what things I picked up from what people said. At the same time I was getting into Bob Dylan. Now Bob Dylan was no great introduction to unionism really. Some of his protest work mattered to me a lot. But
he was a gateway drug, wasn't he?
He was a gateway drug, that's right. What Bob Dylan did, and to some extent John Lennon as well, but what Bob Dylan did was he introduced me through one particular little scrap of biography I had, Robert Shelton's book, was to Woody Guthrie. And once you got into Woody Guthrie, you're very close to the idea of unionism. And Woody Guthrie also then introduced me to the work of the great Pete Seeger. This is where I first heard this song. It's a well-known song of solidarity. It's like all of our favourite songs. It's not something written in retrospect or academically. It's a song written by Florence Reece back in the 30s in America, when which side you were on was a matter of life and death, not a choice you made. What did Bloody Abbott call it? A lifestyle choice? No, a choice for life. And so we're going to start with this one. Over the last couple of years, we have been involved with a series of podcasts on basically masterclasses for activism, and we thank Darren and Nivek and Audrey, and we thank Tom. I really started to understand the strength of the difference between tactics and strategy through those masterclasses. And as we sing this song, that's what I'll be thinking of with what Tom gave us.
Yeah, have a look for those. They're there. If you search in amongst your podcasts, you'll find them. Yeah, Masterclass for Activists.
Very, very well worthwhile. The kind of intelligent guides for living strongly on the planet, especially for, well, I guess we'll use this phrase more than once tonight, the working class, working people. as Chloe tunes in Dare to Dream, Audrey and Tom's wonderful memoir, and I recommend that one very highly. Just read it for the second time, and it's an inspiration, cover to cover. On the inside cover of that book, Tom talked about, well, I'll quote him, "From day one to the end of my union life," brackets, that was a long, many decades of tireless work, "there were three fundamental values that I saw as central to the struggle: the dignity and rights of the working people, the future of humanity, and the empowering of the working class."
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how that good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? We're starting our good battle, we know we're gonna win, because we got the gun thugs looking very thin. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? You go to Harlan County, there ain't no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Thug, or will you be a man? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Florence Reece wrote that one, and we're glad she did. We're glad she did all that time ago. Hi, Sandy. Good to see you too. And so when it came around time to contribute to the masterclass on activism, that was the song that gave us our theme. And I know that Tom had a deep love and understood the importance of music in keeping people together. Solidarity, it's a concept that I hope never goes out of fashion. Unless we can stand, all of us, then we run the risk of losing what has been gained through that solidarity over the last many, many decades. That might be a theme we can run with a bit tonight too. It was important to me as a kid to start to understand unionism, to understand Henry Lawson, to read Henry Lawson thoroughly. That's where I started to get a feel for what it meant to be a part of the working class, which I patently was. My pop was a boilermaker, a sheet metal worker and a boilermaker. He was part of a Lower North Shore family way back when the Lower North Shore was a very much, well, for him and for his mates, a working class part of the world. over time that meant, well, there was something like a Second World War in there as well, but speaking of peace being union business, Pop would have done just about anything to have peace, and the fact that the unions are solidly behind the idea of peace mattered. But what really mattered for this next piece is that when we finally walked out of the rock and roll scene and doing our crazy psychedelic monster shenanigans and found the folk scene, something I thought I was rebelling from, my working class roots were fine, but the conservatism and the reactionary nature, the ill-formed attitudes to the world that I was surrounded by, I thought I was running a million miles from that until I heard John Dengate at the Kiama Folk Festival. And I realised you never ever run from who you are, that's a mistake. So I think in hearing John, I never forget where I was, lying on the grass. It was cold, but I was very happy. And I was listening to John, and every word he was singing and every idea he expressed reminded me of some of my uncles and my family, and very clearly expressed to me the idea of what it meant to be from the working class, and in particular with the unions. The same festival, I also heard Dennis Kevans speaking about the same kind of ideas. And I started to get some very clear ideas of myself as being part of the working class and what that meant. This next piece is 2 pieces from John and 1 from Dennis. Hello, Marilyn. Nice to see you. Carol's here. Hi, Carol. Said, 3 unionists happy to sing along here too. There'll be choruses tonight. There will be choruses tonight. But here we have a poem from John about his dad, Norm Dengate. And then a piece written from Norm Dengate's perspective. So 1 about Norm and 1 from Norm's perspective. And then Dennis Kevans' remarkable piece of solidarity and more, the roar of the crowd. And we'll join them all together to give the appearance of a medley. We have a poem, a song and a poem, all joined together to give not only the appearance of a medley, but showing some solidarity themselves. I always think of this first piece, which John called Australian Made, is what sparked this story is was an ABC News person back when John was much, much younger and Norm was there, and they were watching the Idiot Box one night, and the ABC weather person referred to that northwestern New South Wales town of Tooboobara.
Yeah, Tibooburra. On the ABC.
On the ABC.
Sorry.
The national broadcaster. Would have been
Those
nice.
were the days.
Would have been nice to have a leaders' debate on the national broadcaster and not on Sky Damn News, don't you think? But anyways, even on Sky News, I believe Mr. Albanese had a victory, which is really quite something if you think about it. Probably sent the middle management of Sky News into shaky shock. I hope so. My father worked in a factory, and the sheet steel came from BHP, from a rolling mill near the Hunter's Mouth or a Kembla furnace further south. The steel was all of the finest grade, and every inch was Australian made. Copper and bronze he shaped and wrought. The skills he possessed could not be bought. To his trade and his union he was true. That was the life my father knew. And when his faults in heaven the angels weighed, they found they were all Australian made. Now the old stone GPO still stands, displaying the craft of my father's hands. My father's work to the world displayed, and every ounce was Australian made. Through depression and war he remained unbowed. He was kind, but he was fiercely proud. Cant and privilege he despised. He was not a man to be patronised. He was not religious. He never prayed. His ethics were all Australian-made. His speech had the twang of the gum tree val. He watched TV with a brooding scowl. When the name of a town was mispronounced, he expressed disdain. Like a lion he pounced. His indignation was so keen, he threw his shoe at the TV screen. If we beat the Poms in a cricket test, joy would reign and our home was blessed. But if we lost, at the wall he'd stare. We all felt touched by his dark despair. In his youth, he had wielded the willow blade, and the runs he scored were Australian-made. The only time my father cried was the night when old Ben Chifley died. When they buried Ben and the Dead March played, my father's grief was Australian-made. And my father's dead, as are his mates, with their loves and hopes, with their fears and hates. Different values now prevail. What was sacrosanct now is up for sale. For the global market requires free trade. You're not me, mate. I'm Australian-made. Scarred as the boards on the workshop floor. My soul is sheathed in canvas steel. My eyelids have turned to brass, and the orchard's gone and the apple trees, where the wind whispered through the grass. Here's my altar where I come to take the host. Copper, brass and fine sheet steel, Father, Son and Holy Ghost are the sacramental wine of work, grow sour upon my tongue. Oh, the fruit was sweet on the apple trees when my brothers and I were young. Oh, I've heard the roar of the wind, boys, in the mighty green shirt pines.
gas fire in the mines, and the wind's voice kept on mounting against the midnight's face. And I felt that roar well up in me. That roar has left its trace. I've heard the roar at the school gates when the holidays began, when the kids raced out like brumbies, grown men turned and ran. They raced out through the playground, cried out, "We are free!" Oh, the hungry voice of those school kids still lives inside of me. I've heard the roar at the football match that rose in the crowded stands, when a winger leapt and took a pass in magic outstretched hands, and the double roar that came inside and flashed across the line. But that was a roar that stirred my soul, a roar that was a song. I've heard the roar at the racecourse when the favourite lunged ahead. He took the lead at the ledger and the rest of the field seemed dead. And the roar for horse and jockey as it flashed across the line. That was the roar that spurred my blood. A roar just in time. Well, I've heard the roar soldiers when they first went to the front. War was only a sporting match. They begged to go on a stunt. And they roared, "Come on Australia, Wagga and Henty and hey!" That was the roar of a slaughterhouse. There's nothing more to say. The roar at the town hall when the delegate rose to speak. A roar to shake the merciless, a roar to raise the weak and wandering, to give eyes to the blind. That was the roar of a tidal wave that was making up its mind. So both John Dengate and Denis Kevans went out of their way to take us aside and teach us a lot about what it really meant to stand together and how important indeed it was for some sense of balance in the hegemony of this country. Something I hope we never lose. Hello, Naomi, it's nice to see you. I mean, I say see you, I can't see you, but I'm happy to hear you there. Very happy. Hey, both kids are coming in today. I don't know who's first. Oh, yes, I do now. I do now. It's Megan. Excuse me. It's not Megan, it's Joanna, isn't it? Now, one of the things we thought as we do raise a glass to Mr. Tom McDonald. To Tom.
Yes. I miss you, Tom.
Yeah. Joanna only really got to meet Tom a couple of times. Once at this wonderful event here, we can see Jed and Tom and Bill Kelty roaring out Solidarity Forever at Tom's 90th birthday in 2016. So how old were you? Can you do some maths?
2016?
Hang on. 2017. I was 6. At 5.
5.
I was 5.
There's some good maths right there. Yes, and anyway, Joanna, just recently, as we were schooling, we hit a lesson on poetry, and the lesson was on haiku.
Yes.
And we worked out a couple of things about haiku, didn't we? One was the pattern. I was really impressed. Joanna had a lovely sense of the music of the 5-7-5 syllable thing. So we sat together and we said, well, let's write some haiku. The other thing we found out about haiku was that they often deeply referring to nature in a deep way. So what we wrote were together, mostly Joanna's work, but just a little panel beating from me here and there.
But including Mum.
Did Mum have some? No, I don't think Mum did anything.
That was just you guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, Mum does a lot of things, but in this case, I think it was just us. So you've got 4 haiku.
Yes. And I want to start it now.
Well, you get out of the road, Dad.
Please?
Hang on. Let me just say one more thing. 4 haiku, 1 for each season. So if I was going to be thinking of Tom, I would say, to everything there is a season. And thank you, Tom. All right, Joanna. What's your first haiku?
Leaves are wonderful in summer. They whoosh around. Sometimes they dunk me.
That's true. That's true.
Leaves are wonderful in autumn. They turn cloudy. They crash along the beach.
Oh, autumn and summer. What's next?
Waves are wonderful in winter. They turn to ice. Woo! I can't get warm.
I can't get warm. That's
Waves
good.
are wonderful in spring. Flowers start to bloom. The waves are still chilly.
Thank
Look
you,
up.
Joanna. Oh, who's there?
Good.
Good who?
Good night, bye-bye.
See you, Spanny-Ann.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Jessie. Hi, Australian maid. Yeah. Knowing who you are, it seems to be a very powerful thing to me. It's far from being proud or a sense. I mean, in some ways we are, and in some ways we're not. But just knowing who we are, and there's so much in that poem about who we are. Big kid, here's Megan. You got a Hully poem, Digger?
I do.
Oh, one of our very favourite poets in the world, Andrew Hull. And I always look forward to what Megan's for. What do you got, a murder of crows?
Yep.
All right. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
This is officially my mark of my slightly edgy teenage years. This is as close as I'm getting. There's a murder being committed just around the river bend. I can hear the old ones talking, though I cannot comprehend, for the language is both alien and native to my ears, as it echoes in my memory and carries through my years. There are 3 of them together like the witches in Macbeth. Their aura speaks of mystery, their colour speaks of death. They're dancing in a circle with their wings spread open wide, and they all face in together as they bounce and spin and glide. Black beaks bark a warning in a harsh and ancient song, while the river birds of harmony refuse to sing along, for the song contains no music but ignites my darkest fears as it echoes in my memory and carries through my years. I am trying to remember what I heard those years ago when the old man told the story, and he pointed at the crow, saying, "When you see that dark one, you listen to him speak. He will warn you," said the old man, and he died within the week. And now the 3 are dancing as they talk and sing and scream, and they feast upon the carrion I've taken from the stream. I know now what they're saying. I can hear it through my tears as it echoes in my memory and carries through my years. Thank you.
If you're not familiar with Hully's poetry, I can only suggest that you track it down and there's plenty around and he's done some work on YouTube with various things, and if you can grab a hold of the book,
You can take in the book. Oh, no, there it is.
No, there it is. Wonderful,
West.
wonderful poet. One of our great wordsmiths. I grew up farm to farm to farm, rural working class. So Dad was did a lot of things, but a lot of his work was working on farms, and I was surprised at how that fragmented any idea of us with not a lot of money could see the value of sticking together. And I was in particular struck about how I didn't grow up with this in my household, and yet when I read Henry Lawson, I could see exactly how powerfully that had been part of the life in the bush a couple of generations before my youth. When I left school and headed off to Sydney to play rock and roll, I took a job. I took a job working for an uncle, building kitchens, but mostly installing kitchens. I was working long hours in a workplace, both in the factory, and when I say long hours, sometimes 50, 60-hour weeks. I was being paid almost nothing to do it. And then my job after a couple of weeks was to take the big F200 truck out into the middle of Sydney and install kitchens. And installing kitchens, I don't know, half to 3/4 even of the time were on building sites. And when I first walked onto a building site, I was asked to show my union ticket, and I didn't have one. And that caused a lot of grief, and we worked through it all. And when I went back to that factory, I was told to just say you're an apprentice and forgot your card. I now know that was arsehole behaviour. But the building sites I was working on were relatively safe, and I was working with men and women on building sites who cared for each other a lot. So for that, Tom McDonald, thank you, because part of Tom's work from his early days in the 50s right through, this is not a show for us to go into great detail about the mighty achievements of Tom McDonald. Believe me when I say that it could easily have saved my life, because I was working on building sites that were a lot safer, and that's just one thing I thank Tom for. I also learned from that day on to never not be a member of the union. Never. So a lesson learned in some ways the hard way, but again, thanks to Tom McDonald for his work with his mates to ensure that building sites, work sites, were a lot safer than they had been in previous generations. Now, when I say I looked back to an earlier Australia, that when Henry Lawson was in Burke, writing from the union's perspective, and the shearer strikes were happening it was the 1890s. And while it would be ridiculous of me to picture that time in Australia's history as some sort of utopian world, that, in particular, I think we need to remember just exactly how badly Aboriginal people were treated in those days, and the land and being taken and so forth. We were living in a country that did create one of the very first political parties in the world based on the needs, rights and wishes of working people. And it might be time to just kind of remind ourselves that they were called the Australian Labor Party, and they still are. A lesser of two evils, or the light on the hill, I don't know. But if it's going to be the light on the hill, it will be us that make it so. By the way, also amongst the first to have women voting, enfranchised women. Seems like such a strange idea that would need to be...
Enfranchising women, yes.
Yes. Okay. And also amongst the first in the world to create a political movement based on the environment. So while it was not a great place from our current perspective and what was being done, our vector compared to the rest of the world was incredibly progressive. I say incredibly as in I almost can't believe it now. I chose my word fairly carefully there. I almost can't believe it now. Now, that was the 1890s. And in the 1890s, this song will show you that workers were already harking back to a time when workers were even more enfranchised in their environment. Nothing like a gold rush to give working people an option. And also, I would be very important to say that the 50s and 60s in particular in Australia, 1860s, were one of, if not the most multicultural place in the world. Republican sentiments were strong, left-wing and strong thoughts for some sort of egalitarian world were very powerful. This 4-verse song comes from the 1890s. By the by, Carol sang a former CFMEU wifey. I feel great attitude to them. Building sites are tough. Yeah, they are. And Tom's role in the creation of the CFMEU was pretty remarkable. I'm going to keep mentioning Tom's name. He would be the first to say, I wasn't alone and we did it together. But tonight we're thanking Tom. And so this is a song that harks back to the 1890s and a nostalgia that was already being felt for an even more egalitarian society. And I'll use the word again. Given today's climate, incredible. When first I went out washing sheep in days of long ago, the master was a worker then, no servant stood so low. But now the squatters plump with pride, they treat us with disdain. Lament with me those bygone days that will not come again. From 61 to 66, the bushman stout and strong would smoke his pipe and whistle a tune and sing his cheerful song, as wanton as the kangaroo that bounds across the plain. Lament with me those bygone days that will not come again. I had a pair of ponies once to guide me on my road. I had a decent check at times, but blew it like a lord. And lovely now I hump me drum in sunshine and in rain. Lament with me those bygone days that will not come again. All in unity, combined with heart and hand, till bloody cringing poverty is driven from our land. Let never Queensland come to know the tyrant's ball and chain, and bushmen all in times to come their banished rights regain.
the sheep washers' lament from when they used to wash the sheep before they took the wool off. You'll see around the place all kinds
Sheep
of...
washers' lane.
Yeah, from those days. So we come to the point of the show where we would like to thank Tom for introducing us to the idea that peace is union business. It was Tom and Darren, and I wish I knew which of the two, Darren McDonald or Tom McDonald, where I first heard that phrase, and lights went on in my head like they hadn't before. As we approach the day we now mark as Anzac Day, we'll sing just a couple of pieces that are pieces for peace. And yet again, if you know us at all, you know our interest is to use the words of the time. Of the time. So this piece, called The Sleeper Cutters Camp, firstly, we thank Denis Kevans for giving us this song, and he wrote the tune. He wrote the melody. But the words were written by a man called Dan Sheehan, Paddy Sheehan, born in Ireland, sleeper cutter in northern Queensland when the war broke out. He joined his mates and signed up as quickly as he could. This is the Great War. Now the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
And
need a new name for that one, I think.
Dan's direct experience unfolds in front of you. The song does leave you a little bit up in the air about what happened to Dan. Well, he did come home. I think we can give that story, part of the story away. He did come home. He survived the war and went on to write a much more famous song that he called The Pub Without Beer, which was...
Because, when you're feeling good, there's no time to write songs. So he was inclined to write them, I think, when he was at a lack of anything better to do. Both very good songs, though. And this one was set to music by Denis Kevans.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yet again, we thank Denis for giving us this song, and I would refer to Denis again as someone who did give us some understanding at a deeper and more theoretical way, the way the left is meant to function. So, good on you, Denis. Thank you very much. Well, my sole address at present is a battlefield in France. If it's ever going to alter, there is only just a chance to dodge the Jerry rifles and shrapnel flying round. Well, I've burrowed like a bunny to a funk hole in the ground, where the floor is just a puddle, 'cause the roof lets in the damp. Well, I wish I was in Aussie, where the sleeper cutters can. Well, the tea is foul and bitter, like an ancient witch's brew. The bread is sour and scanty, and you ought to see the stew. The lieutenant that is leading, he's a leery kind of coot. Oh, we always call him Mister, plain Bill would never suit. I'd sell my chance of heaven for 5 minutes with that scam, where the Red Bulls chewing nut grass by the sleeper cutters can. I'll hang out with the jibs. There's not much in being a hero with a bayonet between your ribs. Hard fighting for the froggies, pushing Huns across the Rhine. They can take Alsace and Flanders and Normandy for mine. All I'm needing is a posse where the ground is not so damp. If azure skies of Aussie, just a sleeper cutters can. sitting in me dugout with a rifle on my knee. I fancy I am back there once again among the trees. We long lost friends I'm chatting by a campfire's ruddy glow, where we boiled the old black billy in the days of long ago. The signal comes to fall in, I can hear the diggers tramp. Farewell, perhaps forever, to the sleeper cutters camp. Farewell, perhaps forever, to the sleeper cutters camp. To arms, capitalists, parsons, politicians, landlords, newspaper editors, and other stay-at-home patriots. Your country needs you in the trenches. Workers, follow your masters. That was a poster from the Wobblies at the time of the First World War. Hi, Nivek. It's nice. I keep saying it. Nice to see you.
Well, and it is.
It is. It is good to see you, and I hope you're all doing okay down there. There were lots of parodies of this song as we keep our little thinking of the time of the Great War. God, that's a savagely ironic use of the word. But the First World War, peace is union business. There are many, many parodies from that time of the famous Mademoiselle from Armentières. Most of them are silly or funny, but this is an Australian parody of the song from that time, from the time of the conflict. Again, that's our interest. No one knows more than those who are there. And I don't know, this is a particularly lovely set of words, I think.
This was one we learned at a concert at the National, didn't we? We heard Roger Montgomery sing it.
Was it the first place you heard it?
Not the first place we heard the song. The first place we heard the song with this kind of feel to it.
I certainly think of Roger singing this song. I think, like a lot of these pieces that we sing, the Australian traditional music, it's like mongrel dogs, bits and pieces from everywhere. Hybrid vigour, lots of hybrid vigour in the Australian tradition. And if you are in the mood to sing along, there's some opportunity within this one to do that. Yes. As we know, and Tom knew better than anyone, I think, when we sing together, we hold together.
In this case, it's some faux French, but...
Oh, well, we do our best. I mean, you reminded me, actually, sometimes people pull me up. The lieutenant that is leading in the sleeper cutters camp, lieutenant, no. When Paddy Sheehan wrote the poem, he put lieutenant, he spelled it incorrectly with double O and put it in quotes. The reason for that is lost in the sort of midst of time, but something was going on for him to say lieutenant at that point, and you can work out, I think, some. Let's all have our own ideas, and they're all kind of interesting to think about. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for saying so. All right, Mademoiselle from Armentières, in a version that unlike any other. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous, sang the diggers between their beers, parlez-vous, and the ballad rolled by the diggers gave, and through that old estaminet, inky pinky parlez-vous. Oh, there was a digger long and lean, parlez-vous, from Darling Downs or the Riverine, parlez-vous, who set her heart in a rapturous whirl when he vowed she was a dinkum girl. Inky pinky parlez-vous. Now they lived and laughed in that old French town, parlez-vous, and her heart looked out from her eyes of brown, parlez-vous. But time stood by and there came a day when he and his cobbers marched away. Inky, pinky, parley-voo.
Maybe on some field of France he fell, parley-voo. No word came back to the Mademoiselle, parley-voo. That pretty French girl with eyes of brown, she prayed for him still in that last strip town.
Inky, pinky, parley-voo. From Walker and Gundagai, parley-voo. From Perth to Tower and Boggabri, parley-voo. From Sydney City and Dandenong, they think of you as they battle on. Inky, pinky, parley-voo. Yeah, the people who had some hand in writing that could really write, could really capture something. And again, we're talking about the work from the time. Our last moving on from the time of the First World War is a small medley here. We've got a piece, just a little bit of a parody, a digger's parody of a song you'll all know. And then we'll go from that into a song that was written, when was it written, Chloe? 1924?
1924. Oh, it was published in 1924 on the 15th of November, so shortly after Remembrance Day. But this poem, I'm sure I read somewhere, actually got published in a few different papers and passed on. It was taken up by a couple of different publications around the country, so probably it was published on the 11th elsewhere. It was written by Mary Edgerly, who was a young girl of about 12, working in the Red Cross around that age when the war was on. And this is written obviously in the years after, when she's quite a bit older. She's about 21 or so by now.
Yeah, the tune is ours. It was written, as a poem, but the tune is ours. But first, a little parody to connect the dots.
Now the bleeding war is over. Oh, how happy was I there. Now all friends and I have parted. Life's one everlasting care. No more estaminets to sing in. No Mademoiselles to make me gay. Civil life's a bleeding failure. I was happy yesterday. 6 years today since last the guns took their red toll on Flanders soil. 6 years since brute in human form, tall spire and meadow did despoil. And 6 years dead the war's red light, yet still I hear the guns at night. 9 years today he said goodbye, with jesting word from heavy heart, and smiling lips that hid the pain, and hands that clung, then fell. 9 years today we laughed at but still I hear him at the gate. 8 years have gone by since he fell. They say he dropped in no man's land. In onward rush, intent to kill, his soldier's weapon in his hand. 8 years ago, I lost my all, but all my life I'll see him fall.
Far from it being a peaceful time, but we've lived through so many years now of a relatively peaceful time, and we are not. We're very mindful of what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. But specifically, what worries me is the normalisation of things like how to survive a tactical nuclear strike in the ABC. It tells me that we need to remember the things that were fought for to give us the peaceful, relatively peaceful years we've had, and to improve that situation more as we go on. It's not a fight that you win. Another thing that we learnt from people like Darren and
John Dengate, I remember him saying that.
Yeah. But we're going to follow the story. Hello, Darren. I just noticed your comment, and well, we're just offering our thanks to Tom, really, is all we can do tonight, with some thoughts for what it meant to us. And the most important thing I'd like to acknowledge, really, right from the start, and have done, I hope, is that the education, a proper education you get from meeting and talking to people like Tom. I don't mean education like reading and writing in your school books. I mean education in here and where it matters, where you start to actually get a feel for what it means to stick together, to struggle. And I've got to say, I will say right now, that having just read this for the second time, and I'll just wave the book, Dare to Dream, it's a fantastic read. It is an extraordinary book. And we're talking a lot about Tom and not much about Audrey. Audrey's story is and remains just remarkable. Just remarkable. Get that book and read it if you never have. It's such a great thing. And I might even leave it out so it's sort of half visible if we can manage that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good.
We're going to follow the story now out of the First World War and with a vote for peace, and to a story that comes from a poem written by Duke Tritton, the late Duke Tritton. This is a time from the period that we call the Great Depression, from the Great War to the Great Depression.
That's right.
And 1937, Duke was working for Dole. Duke was a man who could do anything, except cook and dance. He said, he famously couldn't cook and he couldn't dance.
Yep.
He was a great shearer, a very good, clean shearer, a bushwhacker. He could do anything. And the not cooking and not dancing may have been a choice he made along the way. His book, Time Means Tucker, is just one of the great reads. So when a man like Duke Tritton can't get paid employment, as he could not at this point,
we have a very significant problem. If you want to have a stab out there at the true unemployment rate, Mr. Albanese was wrong, I believe, in one of those gotcha moments. Thank you, Adam Band, for the bloody Google it, mate comment. What a wonderful bit of my favourite part of the election so far. But when Mr. Albanese got that wrong, he was fidgeting around tiny figures when, by any real measure, the actual number is much, much higher. I don't know, I've heard numbers like 25% of people who are actually unemployed or underemployed in this country. Well, the Great Depression was a time when Duke Tritton couldn't get work, and he was working as a powder monkey on the Sandy Hollow line, or as the locals would say, Sandiola line. And as he would say, that 50 men for every job, for 50, and the extraordinary position he was in led him to write a poem that he called the Sandy Hollow Line. Chloe's going to play a tune from just between here and there, from Safala, a tune called the Safala Cuckoo, which seems to set Duke's poem off very well. The sun was blazing in the sky, and waves of shimmering heat glared down on the railway cutting, and we were half dead on our feet. The ganger stood on the bank of the cut, and he snarled at the men below, "You'd better keep them shovels full, or all you cows'll go. I never saw such a useless mob. You'd make a fella sick. As shovel men, you're hopeless, and you're no good with the pick." There were men in the gang who could belt him with a hand tied at the back, but he had the power behind him, and we dare not risk the sack, so we took his insults in silence, for this was the period when we lived in the Great Depression, and nothing was cheaper than men. And we drove the shovels, and we swung the picks, and we cursed the choking dust. We had wives and hungry kids to feed, so toil in the heat we must. But as the sun rose higher, the heat grew more intense. The flies were in their millions, the air was thick and dense, and we found it very hard to breathe. Our lungs were hot and tight with the stink of sweating horses and the fumes of gelignite. And still the ganger drove us on. We couldn't take much more. We prayed for the day we'd get a chance to even up the score. A man collapsed in the heat and dust. He was carried away to the side. It didn't seem to matter a damn if the poor chap lived or died. "He's only a loafer," the ganger said. "A lazy, useless cow. I was going to sack him anyway. He saved me the trouble now." He had no thought of the hungry kids, no thought for a woman's tears as she struggled and fought to feed her brood all down the weary years. But one of the government horses fell and died there in the dray. Well, they hitched 2 horses to him and they dragged the corpse away, and the ganger was a worried man, and he said with a heavy sigh, "Oh, I think it is a terrible thing to see a good horse die. You chaps, get back now to your work. Don't stand loafing there. Get in, trim the batter down. I'll get the engineer." Well, the engineer came, and he looked around, and he said as he scratched his head, "Oh, no horse could work in this dreadful heat. And they're much too valuable to lose. We'll take them to the creek and spell them in the shade. You men must all knock off at once. Of course you won't be paid." And so we plodded to our camps, and it seemed to our weary brains we were no better than convicts, though we didn't wear the chains. For in those drear depression days, we were unwanted men. But we knew that when a war broke out, we'd all be heroes then, and we'd be handed a rifle and forced to fight for the swine who tortured us and starved us on the Sandy Hollow line. Duke Tritton. John Dengate used to say about Duke that that he didn't write many, but when he did, he wrote good ones. And that's very true. I cannot overstate how important Henry Lawson was to me as a kid. We didn't have a lot of books in the house. It wasn't a booky house to any extent. But if there was a book in the house, it was most likely a tome of Lawson. Somewhere around here I've got a couple of those books. And there were poems in there that gave me a language for how I felt about the world. Isn't all learning is language in the end, isn't it? It's words come with ideas, and those words are important. In 1899, Henry Lawson wrote this piece. I'm not old enough to remember when there were second-class carriages on trains. I might live long enough to see it happen again. I hope not. But I was certainly old enough to remember the signs. Second class, wait here. I remember actually asking my dear Nanny Pie, what does that mean? It's a good question, isn't it?
I grew up in the extreme of that, really. There's signs over every door saying who could go in there and who couldn't go in there.
In South Africa.
Yeah, so it's black or white. It's very clearly signed. Where you couldn't go.
We thank Christina Mimmocchi for her wonderful setting of this piece.
Fantastic tune.
You know, Henry Lawson sings off the page. He was a songwriter who didn't write melodies, and if he did, they're lost, of course. But I
think he hoped to be sung. You can hear, you can hear in his words how much his sense of rhythm. No doubt they were too.
And I think it's in 1899 we were seeing the re-Britishing of Australian society, and our Henry, for all his faults, was bucking against that as well. And I do hark back to an Australia that was a lot more multicultural and progressive than we might think of.
I see you.
I'm stealing your tea, Chloe. Hi, Chris. Yeah, so many positive changes. For all our concerns, and there are many at the moment, I would live now over any then, for all kinds of reasons, to do with, despite the turkeys, we seem to still be surrounded by good people who love and care. And I don't think it's just us.
On the suburban railway station, you may see them as you pass. There are signboards on the platform saying, wait here, second class. And to me the whir and thunder and the cluck of a running gear seem to be forever saying, second class, wait here, second class.
Yeah, wait here,
Second class, wait here. They seem to be forever saying, second class, wait here. And the second class were waiting in the days of serpent prince, and the second class are waiting, they've been waiting ever since. There are gardens in the background and the line is bare and drear, yet they wait beneath the signboard sneering, second class, wait here, second class,
wait here, second
class, wait here, yet they wait beneath the signboard sneering, second class, wait here. Dark and down, where the asphalt platform glistened underneath the lonely lamp. Ghostly on the brick-faced cuttings, sell him soap and blow his beer. Ghastly on enamelled signboards with their second-class wait.
Yeah, wait here,
second class.
Wait here, second
class, wait here. Ghastly on enamelled signboards with their second-class wait. chimney stack alone. Play the works of Grinder Brothers with the platform of their own. And I waited there and suffered, waited there for many a year. I slaved beneath that phantom signboard till an hour passed away here.
Wait here.
Wait here, second class.
Second class,
wait here. I slaved beneath that phantom signboard till an hour passed away here.
Our man must feel revengeful for a boyhood such as mine. God, I hate the very houses near the workshop by the line, and the smell of railway stations and the roar of running gear, and the scornful seeming signboard saying, second class, wait here.
Wait here, second class.
Wait here,
Second class, wait here. Ah, the scornful seeming signboard saying, second class, wait here.
Wait here.
Ever going past, and there are no class compartments, and we all must go at last to that long white Jasper platform with an Eden in the rear, and there won't be any signboard saying second class, wait here, second class,
Wait here,
second class, wait here.
No, there won't be any signboard saying second class, wait here.
I'll wait here, second class. Second class, wait here. No, there won't
be any signboard saying second class, wait here.
Doesn't get much better than that.
And even if there are no second class compartments, we should sing a song like that so that they never come back. I've got time for a couple more for you. This one matters quite a lot to me because my family on my mum's side were working class Newtown, and my nan got her first pair of socks when she was 8. That's the way she always explained her depression childhood. My nan's mum lived eventually then above a shop in Pitt Street at the start of the building of the Harbour Bridge. By the time that Harbour Bridge was completed, she'd moved across and actually ended up living in a block of flats that everyone will know very well, the Greenway flats, the big brown ones just at Milson's Point there on the north side of the bridge, which happened to be a place that Tom and Audrey and Darren lived as well. I mean, it's interesting that we probably did cross paths here and there. That was all about, in the end, they were pushed out of the northern suburbs of Sydney. Nan met Pop, and Pop had been at Kokoda in New Guinea, and when he came home, they got married, but they were pushed west. And it was a subject that we might think of is new, and that is no doubt one of the scariest aspects of Australia at the moment is, choosing my words carefully, a housing and shelter crisis. We are now finding around our part of the world here people living in caravans and living. We went out for a trip out to Ophir in the creek the other day. There are people living in the bush. But in those days in Sydney, and I guess it hasn't changed, for my nan's family and Pop, it was a push west. Their final location was to buy a house in Blacktown. Blacktown was sheep paddocks in those days. Even when I was a kid, there were sheep in the paddocks around where they lived out on the prospect in Blacktown. So when Alistair Hulett wrote this song a long time ago, he caught something that is not it wasn't a new problem then, and it's not a new problem now, but it's a problem. It's not a day that goes by where I don't thank whoever we thank for, roofs and walls. one of those first requirements to live on this planet, food and shelter, you know. So I hope we can find ways as working people in Australia to fix this one. Perhaps it's one of the more important reasons to stick together and to make some hard choices amongst us all, so people do have places to live. And I guess one other thing that we could mention as we tune that's very related to this subject is climate change and how important solidarity and unions are to any hope we have of the best outcome possible. This is Yuppietown.
People around here, they don't have that much, and they make do with things others wouldn't even touch. The people around here, they work in the factories, and they don't have to choose, they're ruled by necessity. But they better watch out, there's a new breed taking over, they're driving ourselves. They've been giving us the old once over. They want to tear the place down, turn it into Yuppietown. The people who live around here remember how it used to be. Oh, you'd notice to your neighbour on the street and stop him for a cup of tea. People who live around here, they like to have a beer and all. But since the old pub changed hands, you can't get in overalls. But they better watch out, now there's a new breed taking over, they're driving ourselves. They've been giving us the old once over, they want to tear the place down, turn it into Yuppietown. Gonna have to push off west. It's funny how the powers that be, they always seem to know what's best. People who live around here, they've got the place in such a state. People who live around here pull down the price of real estate. But they better watch out, well, there's a new breed taking over, they're driving ourselves. Oh, they've been giving us the old once over, they want to tear the place down, turn it into Yuppietown. They want to tear the place down and turn it into Yuppietown. They want to tear the place down, turn it into Yuppietown. Cleverer people than me will work out what the solutions are, but the problem is evident. It's time for us to finish, and I wish I could say more about Tom, but just thanks, just our deep appreciation. This person worked for decades with commitment, with pragmatism, with solidarity. He fought people again and again and again with his mates. Again, I need to stress what Tom would say is we. We was the important word to Tom, but tonight we're thinking of Tom, so forgive me
be getting specific when the general would be a more appropriate language. Since his earliest times until 1991, when he retired from his particular job in the union, and then from then on, he worked tirelessly. We can mention the formation of the CFMEU, and from almost impossible odds. We could talk about superannuation. Yeah. We could talk about all kinds of
minimum
things.
Wage.
The minimum wage system. I think Tom would probably like to give Bill Kelty and a lot of other people some credit with that one too. But all we can say is thanks, and I will read this. Nikolai Ostrowski was a man who wrote a book called How the Steel Was Tempered. He was a Soviet revolutionary. The point was, Tom knew this from a neighbour of his when he was a young fella in Glebe, in working class Glebe, this fellow who was a bootmaker. His name was Tom Paine. There's a good name for you, Tom Paine. And this quote, I think, is worth reading before we sing our last song. It was when Tom measured, was it all worth it, as he put it. This came back to him again and again. Nikolai wrote, "Man's dearest possession is life, and since it's given to us to live just once, it must not be seared with the shame of a cowardly and trivial past. We must not live through years without purpose. We must live so that in dying we can say that all our life and all our strength was given to the finest cause in the world, the liberation of all mankind." Now, with the possible exception of a little bit of kind of gender bias in that quote, we might expand it out a little bit. There's something very strong in what was written there, and we could all hold that very close to our hearts. And since I read it in Tom's book, it certainly struck me as being a very powerful thought. Peace is union business. I hope the environment is union business. I'll remind you of Tom's 3 values that from the inside cover of Dare to Dream. There's the book again. From day one to the end of my union life, there were always 3 fundamental values that I saw as central to the struggle: the dignity and rights of the working people, the future of humanity, and the empowering of the working class. I've talked a lot about how I would rather live now than any then. One exception to that rule, and there are a few, one exception to that rule is the rising inequality that we are seeing. It's radical, and I somehow have a gut instinct. I'm not academic by any means in any way, shape or form, but I have a gut instinct that tells me that unless we can get that right, then almost nothing else will fall into place for us. So how do we do that? Well, we keep singing songs like this one.
This is a beauty. From 1915, when I'm sure people were feeling the squeeze.
Yeah.
This song always amazes me, the way it just lays it out so beautifully. This is, of course, Solidarity Forever by Ralph Chaplain.
And for those of you who are not singing out there, this is your chance. And for those of you who are, we couldn't stop you if we tried.
I hope this is the first time you hear something that maybe you'll hear more over the next while. We shall see.
What about the next month, give or take?
Maybe even longer than that.
Maybe even longer, I hope so.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Lawson and would crush us with his might. Is there anything left to us but to organise and fight? For the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn. But without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that
The union makes us strong. Oh, solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong.
in our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies multiplied 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Oh, solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Thank you for coming along tonight. If you're not familiar with the work that Tom did his whole life, that's the best place to go.
Or the website all about it, which will tell
Yeah.
you a lot too.
The obituaries that have been written by various people. I believe there's a good one in the Sydney Morning Herald that's detailed.
Yes.
Sally McManus's first thoughts to describe what an inspiration Tom was and what work he did. It was very powerful. I always understood that whole idea of the difference between a strategy and tactics, but Tom explained that to me in a way that actually works, that actually you can put into practice. We're just really pleased to have had the opportunity to know Tom and Darren and Nivek, and to be involved with the podcast, which is another place you could go. The activism masterclasses are really good, really good. But I think that's it for us tonight. These are free shows, but there's ways you can contribute to our own little sort of financial survival if you'd like to. But tonight it's all about Tom. So thanks for coming, everybody. Good night.